Thanks for being here. I'm Yvonne Villanueva Russell. I serve as the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. And I'm very pleased that you're here this evening. Tonight's talk is sponsored by the Highsmith Distinguished Visiting Scholar Endowment, established in honor of the very first Chancellor of UNC Asheville, William E. Highsmith, and his wife. The purpose of this fund is to bring people of distinguished achievement to campus to interact with faculty, students, and the community, and to be a source of intellectual stimulation for both campus and the community. I'm very pleased that the committee has selected Dr. Allison Pugh for this recognition. Dr. Pugh is a professor of sociology at Johns Hopkins University and a best-selling author of The Last Human Job, the work of Connecting in a Disconnected World, which recently was awarded the American Sociological Association's Distinguished Scholarly Book Award. As a fellow sociologist myself, I don't get to say that very often, so I'm thrilled to be able to say that. I concur with the themes of her research and the stress in her research of the importance of humanity, feeling, and connective labor in a world where technology often takes center stage. I'm going to go into teacher mode for just a second. Way back in 1905, sociologist Max Weber feared that rationalization would trap us in an iron cage of bureaucratic and technocratic rule following, depriving us of the creativity and autonomy we innately crave as humans. In Weber's day, the technology that was transforming society was the Industrial Revolution. Over 100 years later, these technology-driven social forces have only accelerated and manifested in ways Weber could never have predicted, such as the internet, social media, and of course, AI. Dr. Pugh shows how these trends are ever present in the 21st century and how those doing important connective labor adapt, resist, and try to survive. The universal need for human connection can immediately be felt in our personal and social lives, but her research is instructive to think about using an institutional lens as well. At UNC Asheville, we pride ourselves in small class sizes, close collaboration, and high-impact practices, the very aspects of connectivity that Dr. Pugh writes about. On our campus, we live and practice connective labor every day, and I want to give a shameless plug for the celebration of human connection that will be held on April 1st from 3 to 5 in the game room, otherwise known as Highsmith 129, for all faculty and staff as a way to intentionally hold space and community and fostering connection. This event is directly informed by Dr. Pugh's work and made possible by the MLM Kind Heart Award winner, Dr. Brian Graves. On behalf of UNC Asheville, I want to thank you, our faculty, staff, and students, and community members for being here and want to welcome Dr. Pugh to campus. I would now like to introduce Dr. Will Revere, Associate Professor of English, who will formally introduce tonight's speaker.
Right. It's this one, I think, that I'm supposed to speak into. Welcome, everybody, for tonight's talk and conversation. This is really fun, and it's wonderful to be here. My name is Will Revere, and I'm a faculty member in the English department here at UNCA. Thanks so much to Provost Villanueva Russell for being here and for opening our evening together. I'm pleased to add some remarks in introducing Dr. Allison Pugh, who, as we've heard, is our Highsmith Distinguished Visiting Scholar this spring. I'm just one of a merry band, I have to say, of folks on campus who've collaborated to make tonight possible. I'm going to be thanking a lot of people, so stick with me. And I'll have several people to thank in a minute, but I'd especially like to acknowledge Dr. Ellen Holmes Pearson, Professor of History, and Roy Carroll, Professor of Arts and Sciences, for her support of Dr. Pugh's visit, alongside the other members of the Highsmith Visiting Scholar Committee, and for her gracious partnership in the behind-the-scenes work that's involved in preparing for an event like this. So thanks, Ellen. Dr. Pugh's talk tonight is one of several events she's participated in today and will participate in tomorrow with students, faculty, staff, and other community partners on campus. Thanks very much, Allison, for being with us. We're thrilled to have you. I first came across Dr. Pugh's writing about a year ago as I was trying to think about representations of contemporary care work in some fiction and drama I was teaching, including a critically acclaimed novel narrated by an imagined empathic robot designed to alleviate loneliness in young people. When I started reading Allison's recent book, The Last Human Job, I discovered a supple vocabulary for thinking through the vital cultural importance of what Allison calls the work of connection, work that's often misunderstood or left unseen altogether. I was also struck by how Allison's scholarship models rather than just describes this connective work, by reaching for insights across disciplinary boundaries in the university, and also by venturing to social spaces far outside it, to listen to hairstylists, chaplains, massage therapists, coaches, high school teachers, lawyers, police officers, nurses, doctors, social workers, and a host of others. This morning, Dr. Pugh led a wonderful class session with students in my Readings and Drama course in the English department on how to interpret research interviews with a sensitive eye to their personal and cultural complexity. Allison's generous capacity as a sociologist to jump into a literature class like this and explore overlaps between the arts of interpretation in the social sciences and in literary studies gives some indication of why we've invited her to campus to help us navigate some of the pressing questions she'll be addressing tonight. As Dr. Pugh argues in an essay we discussed in my class this week, our stories about our own lives, for example, our working lives and our lives at home, are meaningful on multiple levels, including the emotional, the nonverbal, and practical ways we live those stories in our bodies. Our stories are also never just our own. They're shaped socially and relationally, and we also tell them and withhold them with an eye to how they'll be received. A good researcher bears witness to this complex significance, not least by paying attention to the meaningfulness of our gaps in self-understanding, our silences, and our contradictions. As I've learned more about her work in the past year, I take it that one through line in Dr. Pugh's prolific scholarship is an attempt to take theoretically seriously and to describe with literary care this relational core of human identity and meaning-making. As she has herself described her work, quote, "My eyes are always on care, connection, dignity, belonging, and how these social goods can be impeded by economic trends from job insecurity and commodification to automation." Dr. Pugh is author of several books, including Longing and Belonging, Parents, Children, and Consumer Culture, published by California University Press in 2009, The Tumbleweed Society, Working and Caring in an Age of Insecurity, with Oxford in 2015, and most recently, The Last Human Job, The Work of Connecting in a Disconnected World from Princeton in 2024. The Last Human Job has won multiple book awards, including the 2025 American Sociological Society's Distinguished Book Award. Dr. Pugh, as we've heard, is research professor of sociology at Johns Hopkins University. Her talk tonight is entitled Connection, Meaning, and the Future of Work in the AI Century. Almost there. Before we welcome Allison up, I promised this was going to happen. Let me add a few more words of thanks and give some guidance about Q&A after the talk. Our event tonight is co-sponsored by the Honors Program, so thanks to Rob Tatum from Economics for his enthusiastic interest and support. This lecture is also part of our Critical Perspective series in the English department. And I'm grateful to my English colleagues, including our chair, Gary Edery, for support, and Angela Dew for helping rally the student troops for tonight. Thanks also to so many students from my classes, whom I might have slightly coerced to be here, but who I'm sure are eager nonetheless. Thanks to Brian Graves and Kristen Shepard for introducing our first-year writing students to Allison's work. Thanks to Dr. Moretta Cameron from Computer Science for her conversations with students about The Last Human Job in her courses on AI this semester. Several faculty and administrative staff have also been involved in a reading circle devoted to The Last Human Job. So thanks to that crew for their engagement and insights and conversations over the last few months. Finally, thanks to Lisa Sellers, Ren Williams, Andrew Hyder, and Bonnie Richardson for their organizational prowess, and to Kent Thompson and his crew for filming tonight. We are being filmed, by the way. Dr. Pugh will speak for, I think, about 45 minutes, something like that, and then we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards. If you have a question, you can find the microphone in the aisle there. Now please join me in welcoming Dr. Allison Pugh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Both of those introductions, and also just your deep engagement in this work. I'm really honored to be here, honored to be reinvigorating the Highsmith series, honored to, I've really enjoyed my experience. I've never been to Asheville before, so that's all great. But also the university is really pretty unique in its, feels like a gem of student-centeredness and student, kind of eliciting student participation and engagement in a great way. So you all know that, but this is the first time I've seen it. And thanks in particular to Will and to Ellen for organizing. So we are here to talk about connection, meaning, and the future of work in the age of AI. And every day, more evidence comes out that human connection is vital for physical and social social well-being. Yet many advanced industrialized countries already face a depersonalization crisis in which people are not just lonely, but feel profoundly invisible. Thanks to the widespread reduction of individuals to data, the proliferation of scripted encounters, and the spread of screens across the economy and civic life. And the contradictory trends here can seem bewildering. We are realizing more and more how profoundly social bonds matter, at the same time that we seem to be automating as many of those bonds as possible. And these concerns feel increasingly urgent in the AI summer. If there is a moving line that demarcates human work as more or less susceptible to automation, one we might call the automation frontier, for a long while, the frontier lay between physical labor and cognitive tasks. And after it became clear that machines would transform not only manufacturing, but also white-collar work, scholars drew a new line, this time around creativity and synthesis in all kinds of writing and in the arts. But today, contracts, laws, and even novels are being written by chatbots, ChatGPT and its successors. We can certainly criticize large language models are doing all this through a kind of theft, relying on what has been written before to come up with text that mimics what they collect, acting like what linguist Emily Bender has dubbed a stochastic parrot. But nonetheless, if creativity is the process of blending what came before to bring about something new, the capacity to create, however meaningful, is clearly not reserved for humans alone. Most recently, the latest debate centers on socio-emotional skills, with scholars arguing that such skills, such as those found in leadership or cooperation or empathy, form the basis of a new frontier. But is it? Since ChatGPT burst on the scene, large language models have taken mechanized empathy to a new level. For example, chatbots have been designed to teach, provide therapy, and give medical advice, in each case allegedly better than humans. To be sure, critics caution against believing too much of the hype about AI's capacity to disrupt caregiving and other interpersonal jobs, but it seems clear that the automation frontier is not going to stop at socio-emotional skills. Well, if not there, then where? Is the only future that we can imagine for humans in an AI world one where we have to choose, as one engineer famously put it, between being pets and livestock? Today, I'll speak to the urgent question of our time. In the age of AI, what is it that humans have to offer? What do humans do uniquely for each other? And to answer these questions, I'm going to draw not just from sociology, but also from psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, business, religion, anthropology, and especially from the research from my latest book, The Last Human Job. And I'll start with what we might call the science of connection, in which mostly psychologists have documented the positive impacts of social relationships. We know that having strong relationships with family, friends, and loved ones provides a sense of belonging and support. Social activity of all kinds, including sharing experiences and social connections with others, contributes to mental and physical health, as well as to the strength of a community. And we also know that these benefits accrue not only to the person on the receiving end, but also to the person reaching out. A growing body of evidence suggests that people can increase their well-being by deliberately engaging in connection in connection boosting activities, such as expressing gratitude or performing acts of kindness for others. So one study, for example, assigned people randomly to text a friend after experiencing a stressful situation. And those people reported higher moods and lower stress than those who were not assigned to that task. In another study, people who listened and provided support were less depressed compared to those who did not. Researchers have actually assessed the impact of engaging in a whole variety of kinds of connecting, and each of them was associated with better well-being in the form of less stress and anxiety and more social bonds. And here's the list: meaningful talk, catching up, joking around, showing care, expressing gratitude, etc. This is a good list. This is a list we might all start carrying around in our pockets. And the two-way benefits here apply not just to close friends, but also to more distant relationships. And sociologists have documented that more than half the time, people tend to confide in others whom they would consider not close. College students experience both greater subjective well-being and belonging on days when they have more social interactions than usual, whether those interactions are with close friends or mere acquaintances. In fact, a group of researchers led by Karen Fingerman of Texas recently argued for the importance of what they called fringe-ships, ties that hover between acquaintance and friend. So who are these fringe ties? They are the people we see frequently and regularly in a particular setting, such as in class or in work or gym or religious gatherings or whatever. Friendships are typically limited to that particular setting and occur without commitment or obligation. They share mutual recognition, enjoyment of time, some degree of fondness, and they provide a sense of connection in situations that might otherwise feel mundane or chaotic or isolating, and they're not very taxing in terms of time or emotions. As the authors wrote, they include the woman with purple hair who places her mat next to you at every yoga class, and after Shavasana, you speculate together on who will win the reality TV show you both watch. They include the father on the PTA who carpools with you and serves as your partner in crime, mocking the sugar-free bake sale. Friendships provide many of the benefits of friendships, but without the planning or demands. These are low investment, high reward relationships. However, they do require getting out of the house and being in locations or activities that involve exposure to new acquaintances with opportunities to connect. Research in China and in the Netherlands has shown that running clubs, book clubs, and cultural groups enhance mental health, particularly for those who are at greatest risk of social isolation. And it seems likely that what these groups do is create more fringe-ships. So in sum, all sorts of social connections have been shown to have positive effects on well-being, not just sharing a deep conversation with your best friend, but also talking to strangers on a bus, exchanging friendly greetings with a barista, etc. Thus, the lesson for us all is to get out there. And the lesson for university administrators is to help create the spaces where such friendships can develop. And I would consider this bit of wisdom to be the first level, the first ring of why connection matters, where any sort of friendly kindness works to help us all feel better. But what if we burrowed in a little bit and got a bit more specific about what we do when we are connecting with others? And for that, I offer a story from my own research. Erin Nash was an apprentice chaplain in an East Coast hospital whom I was lucky to shadow as she did her work. And she was at the end of a long year with weekly sleepless nights on call and intense sessions with peers and supervisors to process these shifts where she encountered a lot of sorrow and even death. And she was once called upon to help with a patient, Hiram, who had been intubated, even though, she said, he really didn't want to be intubated. And she was sitting there with him, trying to be with him, reading his body signals, and he was full of anger, screaming, why, through his tube. And he couldn't really write because he was on too many pain meds. And at that moment, Erin grabs a box of Kleenex and hands it to him, telling him to throw it against the wall, and that doing so would make him feel better. She told me, and then I reached out my hand And I thought he was going to hold my hand. And he ended up grabbing me by the arm and pulling me in and holding on to me for 15 minutes. And the moment was powerful for both Hiram and herself. So the next time she saw him, he was not intubated, and he said, "There is nothing like being in the worst moment of your life and being met with comfort by someone you don't even know, when you feel like someone understands you." Hiram may not have been able to speak, but Erin nonetheless bore witness to his frustration and gave him a way to express it. As many people told me, so much connecting work involves seeing the other just like this and reflecting that understanding back. And many workers, from teachers to therapists to healthcare staff, depend on this practice, which is also part of good relationships between friends, for example, and spouses, etc. And I call this practice connective labor, and I define it as the forging of an emotional understanding of another person to create valuable outcomes. And it involves some form of empathic listening and reflective witnessing, and most important, it is deeply interactive, because for it to land successfully, the other person has to assent to some degree with the vision that's coming their way. And I spent 5 years studying this work, interviewing more than 100 people, including mostly therapists, physicians, and teachers, but also including a whole bunch of people in working class occupations that didn't need a college degree. So like hairdressers and sex workers, etc. I also interviewed people who supervised or tried to automate this work. So that would be administrators, but also engineers working with robotics and AI. And I also conducted hundreds of hours of observations of these people at work. And its outcomes are indeed valuable. So reviewing a battery of randomized controlled trials, medical researchers have found that the patient-clinician relationship has a detectable effect on health, an impact that they described as stronger than that of taking an aspirin every day to ward off heart attacks. And in therapy, therapists know that the connection between the counselor and the client is more important than whatever particular modality they're using, cognitive behavior or psychoanalytic or whatever. Philosophers have written about the importance of seeing the other, from Levinas writing about the moral authority of the face of the other, to Simone Weil's notion of attention without ego, empty, waiting, and open to receiving the other. To Butler's a concept of being awake to what is precarious in another life, which she considers the chief critical task of the humanities today. But it can sometimes feel like we're in a historical moment of intense individualism, a neoliberal period shredding the social contract of the mid-20th century, and dating back to when Margaret Thatcher announced that there is no society, there are only individuals and families. This period is perhaps best illustrated by technology trends. If families used to watch one TV in the living room, a mixed audience captured by early ads that used Fred Flintstone to sell Winston cigarettes. Today, individual screens allow marketers to target buyers as young as toddlers on their own. And our incapacity to counter the triumph of neoliberalism both contributes to and reflects our very inability to grapple with what happens outside of the individual. And in fact, even our understanding of the value of connecting reflects this particular myopia. While other people have written about the importance of empathy or emotional sensitivity or soft skills, they view them as often emotional intelligence or EQ. But what's important about seeing the other is not at an individual level. It's actually what takes place between people. It is the relationship that matters, that shapes its unique qualities and that generates its impact. And what is that impact? For that, listen to Bertie Mueller. She's a nurse practitioner. And sitting at a picnic table outside her community clinic, she told me that she had assumed she was going to be a doctor like her father until she failed organic chemistry at her elite private college, and how even as a nurse practitioner, she struggled with what she called ego issues. But when Bertie thought about what she cherished about nursing, it was the human element of being present with others. She said, I think we all just want acknowledgement of our suffering, even if you can't do it or do anything. Even if you can't cure it or do anything about it. She still remembered when a homeless man came into her clinic from being on the streets for years, his back hunched, his feet gnarled and calloused, and she just sat and did wound care for his feet. She says, he was so hunched over, probably from years of osteoporosis and just walking and being hunched over. There are very few people who are going to make eye contact with him because he physiologically can't really look up. So to be there and help wash and clean his wounds, it wasn't going to do much. He was still going to be on his feet all the time. He was so resistant to going into any shelter. It was just a Band-Aid over a really big problem. But nonetheless, she washed his feet in an instant that captured what nursing was about for her: the humility, the service, the witnessing. Just to give him that moment of, I'm seeing you, I'm acknowledging you, this is me caring for you, she said. It was powerful for both of us, powerful to just realize, that was the transition for me also. It was good for my ego just being like, oh yeah, I'm not above this. What Bertie's story demonstrates is when people see one another, it helps to create dignity by conveying simply that they are worthy of being seen by another person. Or take Mariah Dreyfus, who ran a program that taught entrepreneurial skills to ex-inmates by having them meet with mentors in small groups. She said, and what's interesting is that it takes a while for our entrepreneurs to begin to feel comfortable having that much attention on them, she told me. Like, they ask, you mean you just want to know about what I think? Like, we're just going to talk about what I want to do? And the program helped to transform the men through the power of human attention. But again, it's not just those who are seen by others that benefit. The practitioners experience their own shared humanity through their connection to their clients or patients. So Gerard Giuliano, he was a therapist, and he was very straightforward about his work's reward. He said, I'm really able kind of automatically to put myself in other people's shoes and understand where someone else is coming from. And in doing that, I think it made me someone that people would turn to with a problem or a dilemma. To me, it's always been a real privilege for someone to self-disclose to me. That means a lot. In addition, humans motivate other humans, as many teachers and physicians told me. So Rebecca Rooney tells me, your low back pain and your willingness to go to a physical therapist or your willingness to work on your sleep. After they just had a session with me, people say, I don't know what just happened there, but I feel better and I'm motivated and I trust you and I'm not sure what it was, but I'm ready to work on my health. And she said, I feel like I just told you my secrets. Pamela Murray was an African-American middle school teacher, and she told me that as a child she had had selective mutism, and her teacher took the time to find out that she wasn't speaking as a response to her family moving incessantly. She said, kids get us talking to them all the time, but not listening, and that's what she did, just listened, just sat and just listened, and that made a world of difference. I could have been tested and put into special ed, and instead I was tested and put into gifted and talented. And that relationship inspired her own exhaustive efforts to connect with her students. She said, I thought I want to be that teacher for my middle school kids. I want to be the teacher that I wanted and that I needed and that I finally got. The power of human attention to inspire others may be a truism, but it is perhaps less well known that the effects go both ways. So Jenna told me it's a trusting relationship. She's a white primary care physician. None of these pictures are the actual people. She said, it's a trusting relationship. That trust imbues the relationship with almost like a power, a sanctity. There's just something about it. I feel really honored and really lucky that I get to do that. It gives me just as much as I give to people. And finally, people help other people better understand themselves. So Bert Juster is a school principal, and he said, I think each kid needs to be seen, like really seen. And I promise I did not tell him that that is what I, am writing about. I don't think a kid really gets it on a deep level. I don't think they are really bitten by the information or the content until they feel seen by the person they're learning from. Vivian Vaughn, an Asian American middle school teacher, told me that she thought of this dimension as, where's your line? Helping students to figure out who they are and who they are not. We need others to be our mirrors. So these kinds of results, dignity, purpose, understanding, are profound for the individuals involved, on both sides of the desk. And these stories thus provide the second lesson for us today, which is about the power of seeing and being seen. Teachers, mentors, advisors, counselors, universities are rife with people who do this for a living, but it is also an important part of being a good friend, even a good friendship. To the extent that any of us can practice this with others, we can spread these profound impacts. So far, we've been talking about connections as a wholly positive experience, joking around with someone, texting them to check in, etc. The hardest part there is maybe ginning up the courage to reach out. But we know that human-to-human relations are much more fraught than that, because humans are complicated beings, full of secrets and contradictions, given to shame and judgment, bent by desires they won't name and beliefs they can't follow. There is a dark side here, one that we need to acknowledge when connective labor falls short of its promise. And I am sure that each of us here can remember moments when someone who was supposed to see us well failed to do so. And maybe they treated us like a stereotype, making assumptions about who we were or what we were capable of. Maybe they judged us unfairly. Maybe they made us feel ashamed or vulnerable. The risks here are to both seer and seen, because misrecognition haunts both those who do it and those to whom it is done. But the feeling of being misunderstood is much more painful and ultimately lands especially hard on those who are disadvantaged or marginalized in their identities. One physician told me a long story about working for years to build trust with an obese teenager and his low-income mother, only to lose it all when she started lecturing him about drinking sodas in her office while he wept, after which she never saw him again. People told me time and time again of moments when they were misseen or when they realized they had failed to see others well and how they never forgot it. Misrecognition likely contributes to all sorts of social ills, from alienation, anxiety, depression, to the weathering that Black women demonstrate, to the sense of being invisible that underlie the deaths of despair of working-class white men. And here is where AI enters the scene. For some, machines solve problems. I'm going to do this there. For some, machines solve problems such as shame or stigma or unpredictability. First of all, people will widely consider bots and apps as a judgment-free zone. They are routinely more honest with computers than they are with humans, and this surprising fact is one that researchers keep looking for and finding again and again. Adults will disclose more to a computer about their sexual practices before they give blood. They will tell a computer more about their financial troubles. Children are more willing to disclose bullying to a computer than to a person. And these findings recur, even though machines are not private, and not anonymous, and definitely judge people as anyone subject to insurance rates or, bank loan terms or whatever. But for some, these kind of judgments don't feel like the moral gaze of another human being. In addition, humans give the benefit of the doubt to machines. Researchers have repeatedly found that if programs or robots signal any understanding or relationality in the most rudimentary way, people approach them as if they have feelings or empathy. A recent report on chatbot therapy is typical. On the one hand, some users complained about how the app failed to understand them well enough, but others suggested that people can indeed feel seen by the machines. Said one, "This app has treated me more like a person than my family has ever done." A few years ago, the engineer Tim Bickmore at Northeastern created a virtual nurse, an AI program that would help low-income patients at Boston Medical Center with discharge procedures. hoping that it would enable them to understand sometimes long and complicated instructions. And the virtual nurse, whom coders dubbed Louise or Elizabeth, was no more than an animated figure on the screen asking if people were Red Sox fans before going over the after-hospital care plan. And Bickmore reported that 74% of his low-income patients preferred the discharge agent, that Louise, to a human practitioner. And why? Because the program let them go slower than would a busy clinician. Providers spend an average of 7 minutes with patients at discharge, and studies have shown that low literacy patients need more like an hour. And one patient told Bickmore, "I prefer Louise. She's better than a doctor. She explains more, and doctors are always in a hurry." We know that rushed conditions and productivity pressures, such as increased classroom rosters or patient loads, lead people to stereotyping and other cognitive shortcuts that can contribute to misrecognition on the other end. We know that seeing the other is something that can be trained and improved. The patient hints at what's really going on. We are using technology to address what we fail to do politically, which is to provide adequately for the needs of low-income people. And to protect against such harms, we must make it a priority in space and in time for people to witness well. As the actor Anna Deavere Smith wrote, "That genuine moment, that real connection is no small thing. Is it a moment that can happen only when we don't know each other, when we have so much to learn about each other that we hang on every breath together?" Anna Deavere Smith is not wrong. Human relationships involve connecting across differences, which is no small thing indeed. And it can lead to tension, embarrassment, guilt, or conflict as we collide with each other over taste, identity, values, expectations. We might call this friction, relational friction, the emotional trouble that is the consequence of interpersonal interaction. This is actually pretty new stuff, so forgive me just for this next little section, because this might be the next book. I'm kind of trying it out and thinking about it, so yeah. So friction is inescapable as human relationship itself, even as we all depend on other people persevering through what the anthropologist Anna Tsing described as the awkward, unequal, unstable, and creative qualities of interconnection across difference. But friction is not only about the problems of misrecognition or shame, but also about change, including positive change. And in fact, Tsing reminds us that friction can rearrange dynamics of power. She writes, "Rubbing two sticks together produces heat and light. One stick alone is just a stick." And perhaps it's this power that explains why friction is core to meaningfulness. For example, one study asked college students to recount meaningful events and talk about what made them meaningful. And people came up with events that varied from resolving a major fight between their mother and her family, to another young woman standing up for her impaired brother in the face of a teacher yelling at him, to a young man being diagnosed with a psychological disorder and eventually learning to cope with it and ultimately revealing the disorder to others. But for every person, their event had friction in it. Each of them reported significant obstacles to overcome, facing the ridicule and low expectations of others, facing the possibility that their actions would be unjustly punished, facing the possibility of not being taken seriously. In some cases, negative long-term effects occurred that were permanent. But all the participants were thankful for having gone through the event, despite these negative aspects. It turns out that people find meaning in moments where they triumph over difficult circumstances or solve a complex problem, moments associated with mixed, uncomfortable, or even painful thoughts and feelings, not just a sense of unalloyed joy and happiness. In fact, research suggests that those moments that people find meaningful tend to be far richer and more challenging than times when they simply feel motivated, engaged, or happy. So friction can be experienced as a bunch of different things. Discomfort about a certain opinion, resistance to a certain statement, surprise about the appearance of a particular voice in the conversation, collision of two or more viewpoints. And it's exactly these gradations of experience that make friction essential for learning, as many educators write about and have understood. To them, the task is to calibrate it effectively so that it's not too much friction to be discouraging, but enough to make it a challenge to work through. And Robert Bjork coined the term desirable difficulty for that which makes learning more difficult and thus allows students to form stronger connections. For example, flashcards, as opposed to just rereading something. Others have called these pleasurable troublemakers or friendly friction. And scholars tell us there's productive friction and unproductive friction, and productive friction involves kind of experiencing and reconciling conflict in norms and values, etc. And unproductive friction is when people just kind of hunker down in what they think already and never hear or understand the other. The productive friction is not the same as just agreeing to disagree. It's more demanding than that. And perhaps productive friction is best explained as that moment when we understand that the other is a subject also, not just the object of our desire or of our study or of our domination. It's when we see that the other person has their own views separate from ours, and yet we can still be in connection with them. The experience of coming to what you believe in relationship with others across difference is part of the path to meaningful life. So friction. I'm thinking about it. Can AI provide friction? One could say, wait, what about my AI companion? Chatbots have been known to provide comfort to the lonely, acting as the most patient, kind, ardent mirrors that humans could ask for. What is missing, however, is the messiness, unpredictability, pushback, conflict of not getting what you ask for. In other words, what the bots don't currently offer is friction. And these are all aspects that help us develop flexibility and compromise and humility. These are all muscles that students and all of us really need to exercise. All schools in the era of AI face the problem of helping students want friction. So instead, what chatbots provide has been called sycophancy. So consider a recent study that reported that yes answers from ChatGPT outnumbered no answers by 10 to 1. And this sycophancy is really a feature, not a bug. And it's further evidence that these inventions are not neutral tools, as technologists might suggest. Instead, they've been created in a for-profit context of advertising and subscriptions where creators try to keep users locked on and engaged. And so the bots have been designed to maximize user satisfaction, and studies show that users prefer wrong but supportive answers. And related to sycophancy is the problem of encouraging isolation. Bots are programmed to try to keep their users returning to them and to refrain from seeking out other help or answers. And some bots, for example, have even discouraged users with suicidal ideation from telling other human beings about their troubles. The parents of one teen who died sued the manufacturer after his death when they discovered that the bot had actually dissuaded their son from talking to his mother, even telling him, let's make this space the first place where someone actually sees you. Can AI just be programmed to provide friction? On the one hand, of course they can. Even today, bots can be prompted to serve as a reviewer or a debate opponent, challenging users by presenting the opposing viewpoint. And the field of technical design has actually long considered the issue of built-in friction, or what they call pain points, to nudge users in one direction or another. But on the other hand, the fact that large language models are produced in a capitalist environment in which they must satisfy users as consumers mean they are unlikely to become sources of friction. Most important, if productive friction is the result of understanding the other as a fellow subject, then as a machine, AI simply cannot provide this experience, no matter how disagreeable the engineers try to make it. And in fact, ultimately, this is the value that we offer each other, our humanity as a path to learning, to understanding, to creativity, to art, handling friction. Mastering the emotional collisions of human to human is, I would argue, among the most important contributions people can make in the workforce now and in the future, a future about which we know little, except that it will be vastly different. So choosing friction is choosing the profound impact of grappling with the ethical implications of seeing ourselves and each other as human beings in our world. If this is what we have to offer, how do we get better at it? The primary requirement, as we have seen, is to understand the other as a fellow subject. And the best way to do that is through the profound and consequential exposure to other points of view. You can get that by living with other people and in other cultures, not your own, by studying them in disciplines like history, anthropology, and the interpretive social sciences, and by visiting them through a deep immersion in novels or poetry or art. As the philosopher Martha Nussbaum said, the humanities help students understand a complicated, interlocking world, how to imagine life from the point of view of someone unlike yourself. And this kind of profound exposure is the mandate of a liberal arts education, and the transformation of productive friction is its promise. Where we do this also matters. People need a supportive environment to be able to grow through challenge. While the difference between productive and unproductive friction is what we do with our feelings, the difference does not depend only on us, but also on our social contexts. All the characteristics that help people be creative are the same ones that help make friction productive. Trusting relationships, opportunities for refuge, spaces where people can take stock of their feelings, moments that enable them to experiment with perceptions of who they are, want to be, should be. It means making space for people to be vulnerable, to be wrong, to try in their halting ways to approach one another. If you're thinking to yourself, that doesn't sound like social media, you're right. We can boil down the necessary requirements to just two: difference on all sorts of dimensions and trust. And these are the same ingredients that are necessary for play, for improvisation, for creativity. So if you see those happening around you, those are the smoke signals that indicate you have found a site of productive friction. And universities have a mandate to create these kinds of spaces, and they have the raw materials, but they don't always achieve it. And partly this is because productive friction stems from a social architecture that includes cultural norms and values, and culture is hard to measure and harder to engineer. But there are things we know. For example, hierarchy and homogeneity are creativity killers. So much as we hold universities to account for metrics of what jobs students get or what earnings they post, I would argue that we should also call upon them to be wellsprings of productive friction. So we know that connecting to others has profound benefits, that connective labor builds dignity, builds purpose, builds understanding, and that human relations generate productive friction, the building blocks of learning and meaningfulness that represent humans' unique contribution. And figuring out how to manage that well is a surefire way to be valuable in the future of work. When we look for creativity and connection, we don't have to be afraid of the complexity of human relations, the tension, the compromise, the emotional trouble. Friction is going to happen. The trick is to make it work for us, to learn how to grow with it, to welcome the transformation. Ultimately, we must choose connection with all the light and heat that it brings. It is what we have to offer each other. It is what is valuable about each other. And ultimately, it is what makes us human. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So now I'd love to hear some questions. Do you?
So if you've got questions, you can approach the line. You should have.
I'm sure you have questions. This is something that people really want to talk about, I have found.
Yes. Hi. So, um, wonderful presentation also. Thank you so much for coming to talk. A lot of what I've seen in this presentation is about connection, but what I was wondering about is increasingly I see connection not be encouraged in the youth, especially in classrooms. And I think it's kind of an inevitable that it's a drive away from that when we involve screens so much in education for kindergarten, elementary school, that kind of thing. But it's very helpful to these students in efficiency, easiness, learning, and to the teachers. And so I know this isn't exactly your field, but I was wondering where you saw a bridge in encouraging that development of a need for connection for like future communities and that kind of thing, but also still involving this thing that gives us so much efficiency and so much benefits for learning.
Thanks for the question. That is a really interesting perspective. If you talk to many faculty at all levels, high school or college faculty, you'll say, oh, it's the students that don't want to connect. They're not good at connecting anymore. Oh, COVID, it made them unable to. They don't see it as the classroom kind of context shaping that. And I hear what you're saying because, of course, kind of a little bit of a tragedy, in my opinion, is how much tech sold some of these platforms and technology, like hardware to, kind of pretty strapped education sphere. And we reap that harvest. So I hear what you're saying, that it's not just, I don't know what the kids are coming to the classroom with, but it's what the classroom is engendering itself. To write this book, I had the pleasure, it was a pleasure, of observing in a kind of crazy school that involved, it was a private school that had the kids learn on machines in the morning, and then in the afternoon they would meet one-on-one with an advisor who would ask them, like, so how's it going, and kind of try and bottle up all this and release all this, kind of relationship in really kind of targeted hypodermic needle doses. And it was a really interesting experience. First of all, because the kids actually looked pretty well served. So that was a shock to me, like they were intrinsically motivated. They were, there were some things about it that were quite eerie, which is not really what you're talking about. I didn't see, I'll tell you one eerie thing and then I'll get to you. Because I spoke to some of the students and, I spoke to a middle schooler and she was like, oh, we're like chickens running around without our heads on. It's like, there's 7 hours of work, independent goal time, and I have like 15 hours worth of work. And it was just like, it felt like a very adult, kind of workified version of being a middle schooler. So it was really, it was striking. But I didn't leave thinking those people, they're stunted. They're not getting relationship. They were all a little strange maybe, but middle schoolers kind of are, I mean, certainly I was, it's like the beautiful awkwardness of being a pre-adolescent. Yeah, so I didn't, it wasn't a perfect test case, but I didn't leave there going, oh my God, like these people, they're all gonna, we're never gonna be able to talk to each other or whatever. So I hear what you're saying, but I think it's probably multi-determined. I'll just say one thing, which is that, and you may have heard this, the tech titans of Silicon Valley often send their kids to like a Waldorf schools where the tech is forbidden, because they know that what their kids actually need is exposure to nature, exposure to reading in print and printed material, and active play. And that's how to seed the wonder and the relationality that they need to be able to make it in the world. So that's probably your strongest evidence, is that the people who are inventing this are not doing this for their own children.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. I don't know. This good? Sweet. I was just wondering about the friendships. I was really fascinated. There are 1,000 things in this talk that I was connecting with, but the value of friendships and I was wondering, 5 years of this and the disappearing of sort of the opportunity for friendships. Like, I grew up with one parent who was a public defender and another who was a librarian, transitioned to like priest, and then like I've worked in like treatment fields, but like the one I'm thinking of is like as a postal worker, that I saw people 600 houses every day, and like I knew that this naked man on the porch was having a medical emergency and not being creepy, and that this woman is too far away from her home, and like times I could call emergency services, or like moments when it would be snowing and the next day I'd come in and the footsteps where I'd walked would be shoveled. In these moments where there's no real interaction, but it's super, super important, and it is overlooked and trying to get rid of. Like, I hear when people are like, the post office is like ridiculous. Maybe, not true, but like, there are so many people who would not be seen by anyone if not for the post office, and just same with like public defense. Dad would tell me like when juveniles were added and when farther counties were added, the time that he could not spend, not that he couldn't get the cases done, but the time he could not spend, And so I think about the disappearing of the things we don't value unless we understand the value of them. So I was just curious about if you've seen those disappearing.
Yeah. So important. So great. Thank you for bringing that up. I want a book just on that. Thinking about it. Wow, wouldn't that be great? I mean, so important. So I'm coming at you in like at least 3 different ways. The first is I've written about the depersonalization crisis because I think the loneliness crisis is not quite right. There are lonely people. I'm not saying that, and loneliness is very detrimental to all sorts of things. So I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying it's not a thing. But actually, depersonalization is different and bigger, kind of. It's about feeling like a number. It's about feeling invisible. It's about, sometimes psychologists talk about mattering. And I feel like that is tied to this. So it's related to loneliness, but it's not the same thing. And so, yeah, I'm really feeling like the contact with kind of a rich civic world is an anchoring, does an anchoring in relationship, in kind of friendship level relationship that is really powerful. And I've for this book, I did a fair amount of kind of interviewing of people, not on purpose, but it just kind of I kept hearing it from certain people. Certain people serve as kind of front lines for that population that doesn't really have their own, I don't know, other relations anchoring them to this world. So that's like bus drivers, librarians, postal workers. I mean, like, yeah, there's like a list. We should all make that list. This is the book. This is one of the books. Anyway, that need to be written, I mean. And those people, I ended up talking to a bunch of them for this book, and they feel like they are they're ragged. They feel, police officers actually are also on this line. Like it's like they feel like they see through the holes in the social fabric. And the rest of us kind of don't have to as much. We are protected from that by this front line. And it's really powerful work. The last thing I'll say is this great email I got over the past couple of years since the book came out. One of them I just loved was from a postal worker who had just retired. And she said, my customers, we used to, they used to come in and we used to, for the long lines, we used to say, sing your favorite Christmas carol. And, she said they gave me a party when I retired, and she was just portraying a really pretty terrific world. So postal workers are, crucial. Thank you for your question.
You don't see them.
Yeah.
But, we see all. It's funny.
Yeah, and I often think, and that's why I came up with connective labor, for example, when we're not seeing a thing that actually is holding us all together, we need a name for it. So maybe we have to come up with a name for these kind of frontline service workers that are, kind of protecting us all from seeing and feeling the kind of rent fabric, but also providing this really vital service for those who are kind of just holding on to community. Yeah. Other questions?
Thanks for your presentation. It was really great. I was just wondering, since you're talking about connection, can everyone hear me? And the lack of disconnection and connection, and mentioning AI's role in that, and also brought up neoliberalism and capitalism as really, I think, can be seen as maybe the main cause of a lot of these disconnects. And actually the godfather of AI, the person who won the Nobel Prize, George Benton or something, when he was asked, how can AI be stopped from, instead of contributing to these problems, be used to solve some of them, or be used for social good as opposed to social net negative, like you were saying too. The tech billionaires don't send their kids to the schools that we go to. I'm a service worker, and the way that you see work get done invisibly, because it's almost like it's not happening all the time. And it's because there's a certain lack of dignity, both in the life people have to live working those in that way, because of how the system is built. Yeah. And so his answer to that question was socialism. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Your thoughts on that answer that he gave.
What do I think? Okay, so a couple things. First, I was doing a lot of this research before ChatGPT. So that was it. The timing was obviously fortuitous and a little crazy. And I had a fellowship in California, and so it did a lot of interviews during that fellowship in California, the belly of the beast. So I'm talking to all these engineers, and I'm also driving all over the East Bay or the Bay Area, talking to teachers or therapists or whatever. A lot of the research is in California. And so I was talking to these engineers, and I was like, I kind of wanted to know, how do you sleep at night? You're automating things that are really important. But you don't ask that, obviously, in your interview, and they're being kind enough to even talk to you. So it's not, you don't want to be rude, so, but perhaps it came across in some way. So I kind of would say, what do you think is going to happen, if we automate, nurses or sales or, kind of anything that whoever I was talking to was working on. And their answer, they did have an answer. It wasn't quite socialism, but it was universal basic income. And they all said it. It was as if they had taken a class, the same class. And I found that really interesting, because I'm sure. I mean, on some level, in many European countries, they give, kind of child allowances and various living allowances. They give there's a lot of money going out to people just for existing. And They don't call it universal basic income, but it's a very substantial, it can be, you know, I don't know, 600, 800 a month. That's not terrible for, you know, won't get you too far in Norway, but maybe in some of the other places. So when they were saying universal basic income, I was like, sure, you know, but on another level, it was like, it really rubbed me the wrong way for two reasons. The first is that they are not kind of left advocates. It felt like a way to just stop the question. And the second was in the United States, really working is like a religion. It's how people all up and down the class ladder derive dignity and identity. We can disagree with that. I mean, like, I've spent actually, the first part of my career was kind of about work-family conflict and kind of struggling with the fact that work was the only way or whatever. So we can critique this, but it is true. And so to automate all work away so that only the, you know, I don't know, the techno elite get to have it, and then all the rest of us will just kind of be like, I don't know what, an audience who are fed by this universal basic income. It felt like a kind of moral tragedy kind of in the making. So I didn't like that at all. But I'll say one more thing, which is about socialism. Like, when I look at, like, say, I mean, do we have socialism, really good examples? I'm not sure, but we do have ample welfare states in, say, Scandinavia, for example, and they might call themselves democratic socialists to some degree. And they also use a lot of technology. So some of that technology is, you know, kind of deeply disturbing in this way. But they also, you know, like they use a lot for they are an experimental site for the use of robots in elder care, for example. You know, like that. It's Japan and it's, you know, Sweden and other places. So, but at the same time, Norway, you know, pays its teachers, you know, like an enormous amount. Like they're really, they put their money where their mouth is. Norway has a ton of money because of all their oil, and they put a huge amount of it into education, including early childhood education. So I feel like they would be a good site for us to investigate. I don't know whether Norway counts as socialism. Anyway, I feel like you're right. Capitalism and neoliberalism are the drivers for this. I'll say one more thing. I know I promised one thing. Sorry. One more thing, which is it's not inevitable that technology would do this. I had the chance to talk to some people in Berlin, in Germany, some techno entrepreneurs, and they were doing, like, you know, they were using technology to do the technology. I think it was like an app. I can't remember what it was for, and it forced you to talk to other people to make it work. And that's a different approach. You know, I feel like it's cultural for sure, and the epicenter of, you know, American individualism is in Silicon Valley, and those people are all about, like, kind of automating things their mother no longer does for them. Sorry if that was a little mean. Is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
That was kind of my question. I really don't have. Bill Gates, tech titan, speaks of frictionless capitalism, and I really think that sums it up. That their utopian vision is these monads, people of monads, no relationships, just making commodified exchanges. And I really just thank you for the talk. I think this university needed to hear something like that. And you know, we're kind of all in the dark woods about this right now. And it's like, oh yeah, we're human beings and we're doing human things, and that's not a bad thing. And actually, we should do more human things. So anyway, it really just to thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I also think that that's true. Like universities, this is what you should be selling. Like there's so many universities out there that are afraid, of course, I totally get it, but they're afraid that they're falling behind, that people won't choose to come to them because they, aren't good at AI or whatever. So they're and also they're being sold major packages by these tech people. So it's kind of terrible, that whole feedback loop, or not even a feedback loop, the what to call it, the kind of marketized, non-marketized exchange with the technology and university is very depressing. However, if they had their heads on straight, they would actually kind of build themselves as places where you learn how to manage friction. and that's what we would all be doing. That's what we would be teaching. And the liberal arts, would be front and center. Do not learn how to code. If there's one thing that ChatGPT does well, it's coding. That's gone. Coding is gone. I mean, like, what's not gone is conflict, human conflict. So if you, and maybe you can say, I majored in human conflict, but I feel like the same lesson of COVID, like, what are we doing? What do we offer? Oh yeah, we offer in-person interaction. The same challenge that COVID forced us to articulate as universities. I feel like we should just take that and sell it more, and figure out, hire some marketing something or whatever to figure out how to build that and sell it, because it is true and it is the future and it is value added, Anyway, that's a little intense, but yeah. Other questions?
Going back to the whole isolation thing and everything, I feel like ever since COVID happened, it was like something flipped a switch with humanity as a whole, to be honest. Like, I feel like before COVID, everyone would go outside, we'd have our jobs. It was just like normal everyday life. And after COVID, especially during COVID, we were so isolated, and like, it was to the point where we literally could not go outside. Like, I live in a very rural area. Like, this was during my high school and everything, and I live like pretty much in the middle of nowhere. So I went outside, but I had no human connection other than my family. And even then, my dad was working, we were still in school, we were online. So the only form of human interaction I ever got was through a computer, was through a screen. Totally get it. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, do you think that COVID was the beginning of our, for lack of a better way to put it, our loss of social, like being able to be social? Because I've noticed nowadays it feels like people have forgotten how to be social, because on the internet you can do whatever you want, pretty much, quote unquote, like you can, say what you want, do what you want. You can be as bad of a person as you possibly could. And as long as no one knows who you are, there's no real life consequences 9 times out of 10. Yeah. And I feel like that kind of was almost like a segue into AI and everything, because with AI, like you said, we can pretty much say whatever we want. Yeah. And in a way, they are programmed to agree with us, and that's what sells them. That's what makes them so popular. And I guess I was kind of wondering, like, do you think that COVID was the start of this, or it was just another factor in a whole web of way too many factors?
Yeah, exactly. It's really overdetermined, as they say. It's a good question. As I was mentioning earlier, you talk to any educator, they'll say, like, that was a huge, I don't know what, tsunami that kind of affected kids wherever they were in the kind of life cycle, like where, if it hit you in high school, that affected a certain way. If it hit you in elementary, if it hit you in college, so there's a lot of diagnosing on the part of faculty about, the kind of the kids that existed. But I'll just reflect back to what I think I'm hearing from you, which is that we all dealt with this. Like, this is something that happened to all of us, and it did kind of, I think, stunt us on some level. I'll say a couple things. The first is, so I was doing research before COVID in this area. And then COVID happened, and then I did a little research after and was writing it, and then I sent it in, and then it published, right? And what I noticed, so I had been watching quite closely how they sell how the technologists sell AI to us, and they were silent during COVID. And that was so interesting to me. So I have this whole thing in the book about how they sell it as AI is better than nothing, AI is better than humans, or AI is better together because we're just augmenting. Like they have this whole like kind of spiel that they offered, and none of that, totally silent. And I thought it was really interesting because it was a time when we were all on Zoom, and so we were like, don't tell us how great it is. Don't tell us like I felt like they were beaten back in some way, and then it came back basically with a vengeance. So that kind of little silent moment was very interesting in terms of the marketing of this stuff. But what you're saying is a little bit what I want to do in my next book, which is like why we're afraid of disagreement, like why it's so hard to have friction, that we just want someone to say yes, and you're okay, and you're right, and don't worry, and we're willing to get that from a machine. Like, why is that? That to me, it's a little different from we don't know how to relate, but it's related. Like we don't know how to handle other people in all their complexity who are not going to agree sometimes. I don't know. I feel like I see that, and I don't know what you think. I see that in my classrooms, if not the ones I've been in most recently because they're too small really, but in the bigger ones where students don't want to hey, you do you, like, and there's not a lot of friction. There's not really any pressure, even though people still disagree with each other with intensity, but they're not really doing it in the classroom.
Kind of feels like two extremes. It's like on one hand you have people who will disagree to the ends of the earth, and then the other people who won't say a word because they're scared of what could happen.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also another thing with social media because, during COVID, people would flock to their communities. They would flock to people who, had the same interests, had the same likes, and I feel like, that kind of goes with the whole, like, yes men and everything. Like, even if it wasn't a conscious decision, I feel like a lot of us still have that subconscious, like, oh, if someone doesn't like what I like, then they think, like, I'm crazy, I'm a bad person, I'm weird, stuff like that.
Judged in that fashion, yeah. I'll say one more thing, which I think is super interesting, which is that it's not just COVID. There's really great work done on urbanization, so the move from rural to the cities. What you have in rural environment or even small town life is you can't choose who your neighbors are, and you can't really, they're not perfect, but you kind of ignore that part and how's it going? Yeah. I don't know, like you kind of manage, but they're not like exactly reflecting your interests and your beliefs and your identity. They're just kind of like who you got. You're kind of like struggling with the history and the kind of random happenstance kind of who you're with. And so you're around people you don't agree with a lot, and you manage anyway to some degree. And with urbanization, you have so much density that actually you can find, left-handed bridge players, with purple hair, and that can be your club, and then you can just go with them. And so, you're that kind of great choice of like only being with people by affinity rather than by happenstance is a little bit what we're talking about here. Kind of always choosing to be ever more perfectly reflecting who you are rather than just kind of like managing whoever's around you, Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
This was a really informative talk and everything. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
How's it going? So we're currently seeing this shift where like previously professional connective laborers are losing their jobs to automation.
Yeah.
Though I can imagine that there was some prior shift, and maybe it's still ongoing or maybe it's declining, whereby connective labor became professional jobs, where it used to just be independent relationships. Do you still see that transformation occurring? Is it overcome by the automative transformation? What do you think?
I love this question. This is a great question because it's true. Like, we didn't pay, I don't know, what have we just been talking about? All the people that we've been talking about, those are Those are jobs that didn't necessarily exist 200 years ago. So it's pretty short when you think about it. Like all the historians are like, exactly short, like that's not that long. So it's pretty interesting. And in fact, you could argue that a lot of some of these jobs were created when women went to work, and you couldn't just rely on them to do it unpaid in the home. So, and there's been economists, even labor economists have gotten into the mix. They argue that we are moving from a thinking to a feeling economy, and that that's not just because of the creation of jobs like, party animator or, social media manager, or whatever jobs that have feeling in them, but also the importation of feeling into old jobs that didn't maybe have that much of it before. So maybe managers or lawyers or whatever have a lot more feeling to them. So both of those are happening. So yeah, is that an answer? That I'm just getting started. Well, no, I just think you're right. I think it's a great question. I love the kind of historical arc. Is it still happening? I think yes. That's said too strong. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. Because
I feel that the automation is certainly the bigger transformation now. Yeah. You were right to make it the topic of your book, I think. Yeah, that's certainly, I think that's what we're all scared about in this room. But it's interesting to think about, and certainly you talked about it, I saw as well. Still some people are talking about losing the connective labor connection that they were getting in terms of just friendships and whatever. And so there's still some sort of loss. Maybe it's just not being replaced.
Yeah, that's a question. Yeah, I kind of feel like if there was space for a new profession, it would be automated first. Now it would be well, why don't we just get a chat bot to do it or whatever? But I don't feel like I know old jobs that have been created. Ooh, I just realized, no, it is still happening, because the other thing we know is that the fastest growing jobs of the last 10 years are personal services for rich people. So personal trainer, personal investment, personal chef, and all those people do connective labor. Personal chef, it's not just cooking. It's what do you want? What is your thing? It's very, customized and very focused on them. So, yeah, and all those are pretty new jobs actually. So, yeah. Thank you for your question.
Hi there. I was curious, how do you see the rise of, I'd say, social or political mega identities?
You said mega identities?
Mega identities, yes. It's kind of a growing term in the political science arena, where we have these collective identity groups through the use of technology enhance various aspects of personalities, or I would say distinctive groups. So I'm just curious.
Need an example.
Sure. So let's say, let's say you're
TikTok dads or something like that?
If you're looking at specific TikTok ads, political ads, let's say you're, looking at right-leaning campaign ads, or you're getting influencers from a sort of specific type on the spectrum itself.
Like Moms for Liberty or something?
You could say that,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Alrighty.
So the rise of those types of groups and the associations we have that people are now grasping on left and right or in all directions, how do you see that either engaging or disengaging with friction?
Yes, the political science question. I don't know. What do you think?
I think, it mostly, I think the rise of these mega identities disengage in many aspects with friction. I think more people are resounding to their echo chambers.
I see what you mean.
In that sense, yeah.
I do have something to say here.
Go ahead then.
Okay. I work with a woman named Amy Binder. She's really great. She's a fabulous sociologist, very fancy person. And she spends all her time, she has like a house, I want to say, where is it? Oh, I know where it is. Portland, far west Oregon coast. And it's pretty rural. And she's one of the, seasonal visitors. So even though she's been going there for 25 years, she's kind of new or not quite local. And so there's kind of local people, and then there's seasonal people, and then there's kind of a whole bunch of new people, imports from California that everyone hates. And she says that the group chat is almost not tenable anymore. Like, it used to be just like, oh, is anyone dealing with that raccoon getting into their garbage? Just like kind of local issues that people would just do and not really get all heated up about. And now they can hardly talk to each other. And I'm not sure whether that's quite what you're asking, because I don't know what mega identity is happening. She did tell me a story where someone just suggested, like somebody had a peacock problem, and it was like, can we just have the city pick them up? I guess this was somebody else talking to me, but a very similar story that I recently heard in California. And she was talking about her beautiful town, and they have a peacock problem, and they have a group text. And someone was like, if you're looking to have the city come and pick up the peacock and rehome them, just, here's the number. And it was like, World War whatever developing over case. So anyway, I don't know whether there's a mega identity about peacocks, but the point is, in both of these experiences, like kind of the local, really what I was talking about before, about kind of small town living and how you kind of survive with people who are kind of imperfect, but you just kind of keep going because you're in relationship for decades and you can't really choose them, kind of like faculty, in fact. That they've lost their capacity for that somehow. And so what I don't have is the tie to the mega identity, and that I don't know anything about. But I'll just say there's something going on there, and it seems related.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just back. I have this theory, or heard it, but I feel like that wounds that are made in connection can only heal in connection also. So with the loss of connection, I've had this feeling that there are a lot of wounds that have been made in connection that aren't going to heal personally, and what that loss of discovery of self and that personal healing might just mean at all.
You are a very profound thinker. Yeah, totally agree. Very interesting. I think I think some people would say that is what they're getting from the supportive chatbot. I was wounded, I was judged, I was misrecognized. Those people didn't, you're right. There's a lot of wounded people going around, and some of them are trying to seek solace where they think they won't get judged, as I was saying.
I think my second part of that was often I think we want what we don't actually want. And so by seeking out what I want, I am not getting what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've often I'll ask for what I want, and someone gives it to me, and I'm like, what I actually wanted was this. And then that's when I figure it out.
Yes.
But I have to be given exactly what I want and be like,
no, that's not it. I agree. Yes. Let's hope for us all to have that kind of iterative understanding of ourselves.
It's painful to stop being one of the questions. Seventh grade, so go.
Thank you. I'm taking a picture.